The gap between rich and poor is widening in Asia.
It almost feels like before the race even starts, the battle's already lost for the poor people.
And in the Philippines, one of the most unequal societies in Southeast Asia, inequality has turned to anger.
There is anger against corruption, but at the core of it, that's anger on inequality.
Wealth disparity in the archipelago is a story that goes back centuries.
You have now the distinct elite class, which is actually a continuation from the pre-colonial elites of the tribal chiefs.
And continues to echo in the present.
Truth be told, I don't think there's even, the possibility of wealth accumulation. It's a lot of poor people barely scraping it to live day by day.
As the Philippines push to become a high-income country, will growth be shared by all?
The opportunity must be there, so that no one should be excluded from having the same opportunity.
There's absolutely no point for billionaires to exist if you think about it, because why are there people having that much amount of money when there are people who can barely afford to eat once a day? And the idea of eating 3 times becomes luxury for them. Habang may mga taong sobrang
Gabriel Pineda is better known by his handle Gabe Talks on TikTok. He has amassed over 380,000 followers on the platform, posting social commentary on life in the Philippines.
I'm 27 years old. I recently became a dad, which was the best thing. And I wish to live long enough to see the Philippines change for the better. People are living in extreme conditions where they don't really eat properly, they don't sleep properly, they don't study properly.
Gabriel's anger doesn't just live online. It echoes a wider reality. Last year, Oxfam, a British-based NGO focused on global poverty, published their yearly report on inequality. The gap between the rich and poor is widening in Asia. It reported that 60 to 77% of national income went to the top 10% of Asians, while the poorest half received 12 to 15%. In the Philippines, nearly 6 in 10 Filipinos live in poverty or struggle with low pay. Meanwhile, about 17% of the national income went to the top 1% of earners, more than the bottom half combined.
I think there should be at least a cap to how much you can earn as a person, where it doesn't become immoral or unethical for you to have that amount of money.
Coming from a household who grew up very poor, I had first-hand experience of eating salt and rice and toyo, soy sauce. I feel helpless, if anything. If you are rich, you don't have to worry when you're gonna eat next because the fridge is full, pantry's full. It almost feels like before the race even starts, the battle's already lost for the poor people.
In 2025, the Philippine economy is projected to grow between 5.2 to 5.6%. Yet, in one survey, more than half of Filipino families, around 55%, said they felt poor. As for the richest, they're doing better than ever. Last year, the 50 wealthiest Filipinos saw their fortunes swell by 6% to $86 billion. That's about 1/6 of the entire economy.
Inequality in the Philippines might be described as being deeply structural and historical, and it has created a cycle of the elite perpetuating their power and making sure that, in a way, the poor are limited in terms of their opportunities.
In the past 30 to 40 years, the country's wealth has been increasing, but this development is not felt on the ground. Power and wealth is concentrated in some surnames, And you would see this every year. There's a publication of the richest persons and families in the Philippines, and these are the same names year after year. Families were able to control the lands, the estates, the means of production.
What explains the wealth gap in the Philippines? Part of it originated centuries ago, when the country was a Spanish colony, which created a system that shaped and divided the Philippines.
You have now the distinct elite class, which is actually a continuation from the pre-colonial elites of the tribal chiefs. And when the Spaniards arrived and created the different pueblos or towns across the country in the different provinces, they retained the chiefs as the town leaders, called the Principalia. We could say that the first generation of Filipino elites were the Principalias, and their role was to collect tribute from the local population.
Spanish rule began in 1565. It spanned more than 3 centuries, and over that time, the class pyramid was refined and calcified.
At the very top were the Spaniards who colonized the Philippines, mostly friars, and of course the government officials who mostly stayed in the capital in Manila. They were known as Peninsulares, who considered themselves a class above the Spaniards born in the Philippines called Insulares. They held political power along with the friar orders. The class distinctions became more complex when Chinese merchants from Manila were allowed to migrate to the provinces. They intermarried with the local population, mostly with descendants of the Principalia. As they got more descendants, they became the mestizo class. And this mestizo class was distinct from the political elite. They had the capital to engage in the local commerce. They got this privilege mostly through being awarded monopolies, to set up markets or to sell special products such as tobacco and alcohol, which was consumed by the local population. The native Filipinos were referred to by the Spaniards as Indios. Historically, wealth had been concentrated in the hands of an elite who eventually evolved into an oligarchy that we have now.
In fact, if you look at the top 100 companies in the Philippines, you'll probably see that many of those companies are family-owned conglomerates that are actually part of this elite.
They all have their own banks. They all have their own malls. You can think of them as islands, if you will, where they control their own mini economies within the Philippine economy. And that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to reduce inequality in the Philippines as well, because each of these conglomerates are so huge that there's no escaping them, basically.
Spanish rule ended in 1898 when Spain handed its colony to the United States. The Americans instituted a new form of government in the Philippines, modeled after their own. Political power was now up for grabs.
When the Americans established political institutions through an electoral process, a lot of these educated elites became members of the first Philippine Assembly that was established in 1907. And a lot of these educated elites actually maintained that power for generations.
If you look at the Senate and the Congress, you'd see power concentrated in some siblings, parent and child, cousins, new names, new politicians, even candidates coming from poorer families. It's harder for them to enter into the political arena because of the established political dynasties.
In the House of Representatives, 80% of district seats belong to members of political clans.
You might say there's nothing wrong with having dynasties because you have, for instance, the Kennedys in the United States, very well-known political families. But in the Philippines, where opportunities are not distributed, to everyone, once you get into power, then you don't want to give it up. So this is why it's been very difficult to make genuine reforms to reduce the gap between the poor and the rich.
The main cause of inequalities in any society would be the greed of those that are on top, thinking that they deserve this, they can take for themselves, and it's theirs to keep. But there's so much more for everyone. I think we, as a people, have the responsibility to call these things out, no matter how normal they seem now.
Last year, a Philippine research firm found that many young Filipinos are anxious about inequality. They feel that the system is rigid and stacked against them.
There are several dimensions of inequality. Inequality of opportunities, that's the more appropriate concept of inequality. And this has to do with inequality in access to education, inequality in access to work or employment, to health, to social protection, to mobility, digital connectivity, all this,
Especially those coming from poorer families, they're more concerned with basic needs, survival, day-to-day existence. And so they've resigned that this is the universe that they are working with. And so when a problem or a challenge comes before them, they step back and think that it's a challenge that they cannot overcome.
If you were a poor Filipino, the easiest way to live through life and to journey throughout this country is to just accept it. Because it would be a lot more tiring, frustrating, demoralizing to even fight, to even try to fight, and not have anything in return.
Geria's words echo across generations. And the starting line was drawn long before they were born, on maps and land titles.
Yung apartment po na nakuha namin is sobrang liit lang din po eh. Parang pagbukas po ng pinto namin parang higaan na po. Tapos pag gilid mo po, lababo. Tapos na po, banyo na po yung dito.
Arlaika Campanas is 19. She moved into this room in Bulacan 5 years ago with her parents, sibling, niece and nephew. They did so after being evicted from their old home in Sitio Quince, a fishing community on the coast of Manila Bay.
Nabalitaan po namin na magpapatayo daw po ng airport dun sa lugar po namin. Tapos sabi po, paalisin daw po lahat ng tao doon, pero babayaran naman daw po. Tapos after nga nun, sabi po ng magulang ko na huwag daw po pumayag yung mga tao daw po doon kasi nga daw po doon na sila lumaki. Parang sayang naman daw po kung aalis pa.
Fond memories are all that remain. The coastal community that had long sheltered families of fisherfolk is now a construction site for the new Manila International Airport, a $12.5 billion project led by one of the country's biggest conglomerates, San Miguel Corporation. Spanning 2,500 hectares, the new development promises to improve connectivity, boost economic growth, and create more than 1 million jobs. But the mega project is an example of the Philippines' dilemma when it comes to inequality. Who benefits and who feels left out?
That is what development is all about. Investment in major infrastructure. There are gainers and losers. We look at the cost benefit, whether the benefits are to society, to the economy, are greater than the cost. And what society must do is to ensure that those who are who suffer or who incurred losses are compensated.
There's nothing wrong again with having big ticket items. In fact, we need to spend. Of course, we can understand that there might be some people who may be displaced in the short term. But if they are going to be given other opportunities, shifting their job somewhere and where they'll even be getting better paying jobs, better housing, then of course that will mean a good thing in the long term for Filipinos.
Whenever you build infrastructures, you demolish urban poor communities. So where do you put these people? How do you really see their livelihoods in the long run?
For losing their homes, families were compensated between $1,700 and $2,500 US. For Arlaika's family, it was $85 US.
Hiningan po kami ng mga papeles na magpapatunay na talaga bang nakatira po ba kami talaga doon. Wala pong maipakita yung magulang ko kasi nga po, hindi po sa amin yung mismong, kumbaga wala kaming maipapakita kasi nga po, naalis, bumalik. Nung po, pinagyan na po kami ng mga 2 to 3 weeks lang po para po makapag-ayos po ng mga gamit po namin na ililipat po sa dito nga po.
Philippines is basically an agriculture country. More than 70% are farmers. So a lot of farmers up to now are landless, and a lot of them are indebted to the landlords. They don't have their own titles to the land, but they've been tilling and taking care of the land for God knows how long. So and this situation are being taken advantage of by big corporations.
Only 1 in 5 Filipino farmers owns the land they till, according to the Philippine Statistics Authority. Various administrations have launched land reform programs to redistribute ownership and reduce inequality. But the outcome is mixed.
Land is always the starting point. The Philippines being a feudal economy in a way, you are what you own in terms of land. If you are from a very low-income family, hardly any land, then your opportunities for improving, for social mobility and economic mobility are very slim.
Land is more than a physical asset here. It's tied to power, a legacy of Spanish rule, where many farmers lost their land to the ruling elites.
Because of the burden of having to pay tribute to the colonial government, they often fell into debt. And they borrowed money mostly from these mestizos. Another manner in which these mestizos became wealthy was through the acquisition of land. Through the inability of the Indios to pay back their loans. So this is one major factor which created a very huge, not just wealth, but also gap in social classes in the Philippines.
If you go around Metro Manila, you have the urban centers, the suburban centers are actually named after families, landed families, called Ayala Center, Araneta Center, Ortiga Center, etc., etc. So these are concentrated to old families and new land developers. So that's how tightly concentrated, and in that sense, very class-based land is in the urban areas, and I would argue all over the Philippines as well.
The Gini coefficient can be applied to land holding. 0 means that land is equally distributed, while 1 means one individual or household possesses all land. According to the last available data, the land Gini coefficient for the Philippines was over 0.6.
The Gini index in 1918 for land was around 0.7. Today, it hasn't changed. It's still about 0.6, which means that only roughly the top 3% of landowners own 25% of all the land.
In this country, we identify several classes to be on top. We have landlords, we have big business, so we have those big capitalists, and they essentially own swaths of land or big corporations. and they position either their own family members or themselves or their pets in positions of political power so that they can get policies or permits or whatever is necessary so that their business keeps booming, that they will ensure gets passed or is rubber stamped.
That imbalance has real consequences for people like Arlaika. When her family owned the house they built, the surrounding areas provided their livelihoods.
Almost lahat naman po ng tao doon, trabaho po is yung nangangapa nga po. Pero malaki po yung kita po nila doon. Malaki naman po yung kita ng magulang ko doon. Kesa po dito, nahihirapan po yung parents ko na maghanap buhay, lalo na po yung mama ko ngayon is housewife lang po. Tapos po naman yung papa ko naman po ngayon is construction worker lang po.
For the most part, relocation projects haven't worked very well because apart from the poor quality of households that you build in the outskirts, many of these supposed beneficiaries would rather go back to the middle of the city to find viable employment.
When you don't have land, you're constantly racing against rent. It's a hand-to-mouth kind of existence in a sense, where if you run out of work, you run out of shelter. So for a lot of poor people, it's a choice between homelessness and possibly picking a place that's affordable but is in a hazard-prone area.
And things could get worse for those on the lower rungs of the socio-economic ladder. The Philippines ranks amongst the countries most at risk from climate change. Meanwhile, multiple studies show that natural disasters disproportionately impact the poor.
These poor people in communities doesn't have much anyway. One flash flood will wash it all away. And it will take them how many years to buy a single mattress or to replace everything that they've lost. That keeps them into further poverty.
Home and land ownership is slipping out of reach for some ordinary Filipinos. Real estate prices, especially in Manila, climbed since COVID, though prices have come down more recently.
More and more middle class are moving out of Metro Manila, and this is not by choice. And being so then creates this situation where access to certain things become even more difficult for the lower class people. The quality of health, quality of education, quality of service, etc. But it's also because the design of where we put the services is also highly concentrated, again, in the urban areas.
Though the Philippines had been doing well with poverty reduction, the pandemic would set back these efforts. Post-COVID, the Filipino economy would rebound quickly. However, the poverty rate did not fall until 2023. This is an indication that the initial pandemic recovery did not benefit the lower rungs of society, and they're playing catch-up.
Well, because of the disruption, the COVID contraction of almost like 10% of the economy, obviously that we lost the momentum there. In fact, it exacerbated inequality because again, going back to access, who had access to protecting themselves from the pandemic? It's the rich, right?
There was definitely K-shaped recovery. K-shaped recovery means that the rich are able to bounce back more or faster compared to the rest of the population.
It's a lot of poor people barely scraping it to live day by day, even among the middle class. Because you need to think about education, you need to think about mortgages, transportation, your cost of living is unbelievably high in the city.
With the change in her family's circumstances, education may have slipped out of reach for Arlaika. She had to leave school, along with her dream of college and a better life.
Sabi po, susubukan daw po na makapag-aral pa po ako next year, sakali man po. Baka po may posible na mangyaring matupad ko nga po kung hindi ko po poproblemahin yung financial kasi nga malaki nga daw po gastos ng pagka-college daw po. Para po sa akin may posibilidad po na mangyaring ganun po kasi nga po malit yung kita ng papa ko tapos siya lang po yung nagtatrabaho sa pamilya namin.
Education is traditionally seen as a way out of the poverty cycle, a crucial step up the economic ladder. But for millions of young Filipinos, even that path may no longer be viable.
I'm currently 25 years old. During the pandemic, of course, livelihood opportunities for my parents before got cut. My father was a tricycle driver and my mother has no job. They even told me that someone from us 3 kids would have to stop going to school. And I don't like that. I think education is important and I think that's how I get into sex work. I see sex work like as an opportunity for me to get more money to sustain myself so that my parents would only think about my other siblings. Life could be unfair when it comes to education in terms that for someone like me who's a working student who is not even supported by their family.
Education is often seen as a pathway to move up the social-economic ladder. But in the Philippines, that pathway depends on where you start. For those in the highest income group, almost half attain higher education. But if your family is in the bottom 10%, only 17% reach those qualifications.
I really feel envious about some rich students because they have the opportunity or even the option to fail. If ever they did not graduate, they can always inherit the business of their parents. And that's not something that I have when it comes to going to school or going to a university. You don't only have to think about tuition. You also have to think about your living expenses like the food, the rent, the transportation. While some other people, they don't really think about that stuff.
Elio studies social work at a public university in Manila. Classes by day, vice work by night. He's pushing for a degree in the hopes that it will make life easier. But recently, in the Philippines and elsewhere, the promise that higher education brings is fading. An increasing number of university graduates are unemployed. In June 2025, almost 4 in 10 of the unemployed are college graduates.
Education can open doors. However, there's also a limit to the number of doors that are open. And so you may find employment that may not necessarily match your skill set, meaning they're employed in careers that really do not fully utilize their skill sets.
For instance, you go to advanced economies where you have a very strong industrial base, but in the Philippines, the manufacturing base is very weak. In large part because these conglomerates, the family-owned corporations, they would rather go into safe investments. And by safe, I mean they get into businesses in the services sector. They'll be owning malls, they'll be owning banks, all in services. But what are they producing? And how much are they employing? Very little.
For poverty reduction is faster when you have robust manufacturing. So the question for us is why did manufacturing did not grow as rapidly as in the case of Thailand, for example, or now Vietnam or Malaysia. It's not because our elite did not want to invest in manufacturing. Their common complaint is high cost of doing business. Just getting the permits to operate takes so many days, so many weeks. And even if you are no longer profitable and you want to shift to another economic activity, it's so difficult to exit. So it is those areas that we have been trying to address, the ease of doing business.
Meanwhile, the Philippine labor market is struggling with a skills mismatch. In January last year, only 13% of applicants were hired in job fairs held by the Labor and Employment Department. Most hires were for low-skilled jobs that do not require a college degree.
Many of workers belonging in the middle class are taking low-paying jobs, which are for low-skilled workers. The most skilled, intelligent people actually, they go abroad, and they find better opportunities for them abroad.
Furthermore, some experts claim that the pandemic may have set students back by 2 to 3 years, with the poor more adversely impacted.
So children coming from poorer families would have been more impacted by the pandemic, especially in the areas of literacy and even numeracy, mainly because they haven't been receiving the help that they needed, the guidance that they needed, since we were all forced to stay at home. The higher income families definitely would have more resources. They would have more devices, better internet connectivity. And so education still would continue for them.
Elio managed to pull through this difficult period and entered university. However, he has chosen a degree that is not considered lucrative.
I believe that going into social work would not lift my family out of poverty. But I think that it could get my family into living a more decent life. If I graduate social work, I can do development work, other fields of social work, like for example, corporate social work. They said that they have a high paying grade there.
While Elio is optimistic, for some young Filipino graduates, landing a job doesn't mean moving up. The payoff from a college degree is shrinking. In 2010, college graduates saw returns of over 140%. By 2022, that had slipped to around 94%. One key driver is falling education quality as enrollment increased.
Notoriously, we have a 90% learning poverty rate, one of the highest in Southeast Asia. And that only means that 9 out of 10 school children are not able to understand what they are reading. They get very poor quality education, especially when they go to public schools. So we have an education crisis here in the Philippines, which has a massive implication on inequality of opportunities, especially.
The disparity starts really early. It starts with the education opportunities that you get. Someone coming from a lower income family whose educational opportunities are just related to ones offered in school will not have added learnings coming from, let's say, after-school programs.
To level the playing field, the government introduced a tuition-free program for all state universities and colleges in 2017. But critics say that without means testing, the rich have availed themselves of these spaces, crowding out the poor.
So naturally, the universities would tend to rank who are the best students to come into the school. So, and because the poor tend to be on the lower rank because they tend to come from not so good quality high schools, so they actually are at the losing end of this free public education. It was a populist move, but at the same time, actually, it did not yield the right results, even if there would be some poor who would get into the free public schools. They cannot sustain staying because there's a lot of cost in it.
When you have more resources, you have a choice of educational options. But that's not true for the lower classes. Others would just have to accept whatever government has to offer.
Nearly 4 in 10 college students in the Philippines drop out before they can complete. At the same time, help for the poorest has been shrinking. Their share of education subsidies fell from 74% in 2018 to 31% in 2022. For students like Elio, these aren't just numbers. They show up in the daily struggle to study and to survive.
I have to juggle a lot of different responsibilities, like how do I pay my bills? How do I get to school the next day? You would always have to think or enter other opportunities in order for you to get money. I found a full-time job at Quezon City and also doing sex work on the side.
Selling his body is risky, as the Philippines has the highest HIV infection rate in Southeast Asia. For Elio, his college degree will be the light at the end of the tunnel.
I think I'm planning to stop it when I graduate because getting a diploma would open me to more doors, to more opportunities, to get a higher salary, to have a job that is more high paying, a job that would not just pay my living expenses but would also enable me to experience other things such as the stuff I want to try, like traveling, entering a new hobby. It is something that I get not to experience today. But yeah, I think it's something that I would experience in the future.
If inequality keeps shaping who gets ahead, what does it mean for the Philippines? Beginning in September, thousands took to the streets across the Philippines in protests. Ostensibly, the outcry was over corruption involving flood control projects. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. had earlier revealed that over 100 billion pesos, or around $1.7 billion, could be lost to graft.
There is anger against corruption, but at the core of it, that's anger on inequality. Right now, the youth are incredibly apprehensive. They're anxious because, as it stands, if corruption continues and if inequality continues, what would the future of the youth look like 10, 20 years down the line?
There are estimates that as many as 100,000 people joined the September protests in Manila alone. The demonstrations were characterized as youth-led, as many in the crowd were Gen Zs or millennials. Content creator Gabriel was among them.
So I think the youth have come to a point where they don't want to accept it. They don't want to live in the reality where there are people not eating and there are people eating too much. I think the older people have just sort of accepted that the Philippines is poor without questioning the idea of it being poor. But the young people are now like challenging the status quo, the idea of us being poor. The Philippines is not poor, it's plundered, it's stolen of, it's robbed.
But it's so toothless, essentially.
Beyond protests, some want to change the system from within.
No, don't do that.
Renee is a 28-year-old lawyer and activist. She's also the representative of the Youth Party List. The party list is how the Philippines Congress accords seats to marginalized groups like indigenous peoples, women, and youths.
I've interacted with a lot of youths who are in the middle class. When we're in relationships or when we're thinking about building a family, it feels like a distant dream. Because how will we be able to do that if we can't really even support ourselves? Next steps.
For Renee, there's a sense of urgency. The age limit for the youth representative is 30, after which she will have to give up her seat. This means Renee has about 2 years to push for the change she wants to see.
Inequality in the Philippines is by design. The policies that affect majority or 99% of Filipinos are built to continue to keep them poor. So we have to pass laws that break up political dynasties or make sure that they don't run for office again and again. We have to pass bills so that businessmen, contractors don't take advantage of the party list system or the electoral system so that they can field their candidates or their own families into these positions of power.
There's a reason the youth are more active in calling out inequalities. Thanks to social media, inequality in the Philippines is more visible than ever. Prior to the September protests, the hashtag #NepoBabies trended online. It described posts by children of wealthy families flaunting their riches on the internet.
Can you imagine one influencer showing off that she spent thousands of dollars on just one meal, And whereas many Filipinos will not be able to see that income in maybe 1 or 2 years. Social media has helped to be able to disseminate information, and that has spurred the anger of, especially if our young, that this is too much for them, and they're getting really irritated that why are we paying these taxes and yet we're not getting what we gave government.
The thing about Filipinos, we are very patient people. But at the same time, what has changed is that Filipinos are everywhere now, and Filipinos are digitally connected, which means that while we counted on patience before, that may no longer be the case now, because people are comparing our infrastructure with that of Thailand, with that of Indonesia, with that of Vietnam, right? That has now make them ask, why are we not like this? Why are our leaders not like their leaders?
For its part, the government vowed to crack down on corruption. The Marcos Jr. administration launched a nationwide audit of flood control projects and set up an independent probe body. Several people linked to the scandal were detained late last year.
Kaya't yung mga taong yan na kasabwat dyan, ito, mga walang hiyang ito, na nagnanakaw ng pera ng bayan, tapos na ang maliligaya ninyong araw. Hahabulin na namin kayo.
In a society, there is always a corruption, but it's the accountability that when you are found out, you are made accountable. So that's the kind of regime that we want. I know you have seen the president's intention of addressing that issue, and we are indeed tackling the issues there by punishing those who are involved in a way that's relatively fast given the limits of our laws, and so make people accountable for their bad actions. And that is what builds confidence for our people.
The challenge now is to make sure economic growth is equitable. The Asian Development Bank estimates that the Philippines' economy grew around 5% in 2025, the second fastest in Southeast Asia after Vietnam. This is slightly lower than previous projections.
I think many of our goals are still achievable, even medium term, like single-digit poverty by 2028, for example. The really more sustaining and most effective approach is just focus on improving that equality of opportunities. Those opportunities start with improvement in the quality education, access by all people, not just the rich, of quality education, access of quality health services, access of quality jobs. In creating those access to opportunities, like you need money, right? And good programs to address that issue. Where do you get that money if government is corrupt?
Whether or not the current crisis about corruption can translate into real reforms that will improve people's chances of social mobility, getting better services, creating more new sources of wealth, that remains to be seen. If business as usual continues, we would think that we will get stuck in the so-called middle income trap, which means we will not be able to reach an advanced economy status.
Meanwhile, anger over the flood control corruption has not abated. In November, hundreds of thousands continued to take to the streets in demonstrations organized by religious groups. So, inequality could continue to be a pressing issue in the new year and perhaps well into the next election cycle in 2028.
Populism has arisen partly because of the anger, not just of the youth, but of many people in society who feel that they have been left out. People are hungry for change because they have realized that things are only benefiting some people, not everyone, especially not themselves.
I think I'm gonna see a better Philippines in my lifetime, if I'm being perfectly honest. If in this lifetime we weren't able to get the results that we want, at least we're paving the way for my daughter, at least.
As for Alaika, she has a plan to break the cycle of poverty by joining the military and earning a stable income.
Ang gusto ko po is magkaroon po ng sariling bahay po yung magulang ko, yung malayo po sa baha, yung hindi po nila problema yung pag umulan po ng malakas yung magbabaha, tapos yung mag-evacuate, ganun po. Yung stay lang po sa bahay kasi nga po malayo sila sa yung tubig, yung babahain, ganun. Magkaroon na po ng sariling bahay.
Pag sinabi kong Pinoy, sumigaw ng hoy! Pinoy! Pinoy! Pag sinabi kong Pinoy, sumigaw ng hoy! Pinoy! Pinoy!